Hi guys, a very warm welcome to the Niels van Roij Design YouTube channel, and thank you for sending in all these questions again. We've got a selection of new questions that I'll answer today. Let's start with Punkt Crisscross 63. He has a series of questions, so thank you for that. And let's start with the very first one. To me, he says, it looks like a very interesting mix of several cars. There seems to be a bit of Ferrari in it, in the front end perhaps a bit of Corvette, maybe the C6, the C7. In the C-pillar, in the side window, I see a 924 or a 944 Porsche. And the upper rear window, the wraparound the glass, reminds me of the Iso Grifo, which I had as a matchbox car as a teenager. He says that it's one of the most exciting rear windows a car can have, because I love that shape. I'm really glad that you picked this idea into your study. And then in the lower rear window at the back, it reminds me of the famous Volvo from the 60s or the 70s. I think it was the P1800 ES. Other people refer to that car as well, actually. But let me answer this first, because actually none of the cars you mention are of any relevance to the design. I understand, however, that you see them in a car, just like we see a human face in the moon. We see a human face on the tree, perhaps in a dark, scary forest. The human brain is when it sees something new, it is looking at, have I seen this before? In your storage space, you have all these things you link to. So, of course, as a car designer, it's important to come up with new ideas. In this case, the entire car is a new car, but it's linked to the Daytona shooting brake from 1972, designed by a company in England, Punkt, for an American car importer, the American Ferrari importer. However, like I said, none of the cars you mentioned are actually at the base of the Daytona shooting brake Hommage, but of course, the human brain recognizes these faces, if you like, recognizes these other cars that you like and love. Much like, for instance, on the bread van Hommage from the United States, we got comments, well, the front end looks like a Pontiac to me. Whereas in Europe, on our social media channels, nobody from Europe has actually said that. So it's interesting how your geographical location obviously influences what is in that storage space, the cars you see a lot on the road. And the European people actually saw the 62 bread van in the nose of our bread van Hommage. So it just goes to show that what you have in your memory is key for what you see in other objects, in other people perhaps even, but definitely in other objects. So although it's a very interesting point, because now I could talk a bit about how this collective consciousness, let's say, works. It is important for any car designer, also at OEMs, so at big car manufacturers, to have a look at how the shape you came up with links to other things in culture in different countries. So, for instance, a three-pointed star on the bonnet maybe looks very nice, but it will, of course, remind everybody of Mercedes-Benz. So, this is a very obvious example, but it goes for a lot of ideas in car design. For instance, the Hofmeister kink that BMW used to have in many of their cars, ditched recently in, for instance, the M3 and M4 and also the regular 3 and 4 series. But fortunately it's back again in the new 2. If another car manufacturer is taking that cue, that design DNA, it will be a bit too obvious that it's been taken from BMW, just like double kidney grills or stuff like that. But there will always be things that happen all around the world. So sometimes different car design studios come up with different concepts, but similar aesthetics, and that's not because they've peeked over the fence and stole something. It's just sometimes it's like growing in society, if you like, that certain shapes evolve into something new. Anyway, thanks for putting that in, Punkt, and he says also it would be really nice to listen to your explanation of your designs and the ideas behind it. well, I hope this video does a bit of that, and also the previous videos on the Daytona Shooting Brake Hommage and your questions on that car. And he says also, let me know if you can take us through the continuous development of the car. Well, we'll do that on our social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, are important channels for us. We post every week on this car there. You can see the progress, follow the progress. And he says also it would be interesting to have like an English lesson of the names of all parts of the car shapes, like pillars and fenders, air intakes, and showing that on screen. That would be a great video for me, he says. Well, we can do that in another video, but for now, let's move on to the next question, which is by Mikhail Venklenko. And he says, it's very interesting to hear how the idea was born. After working with clay and sculpture, then choosing and working with materials, I'd like to see a long video on that. Well, we have done that in the previous video on the Daytona Shooting Brake Hommage, showing how the coach builder goes to work, Bas, what he did, and every once in a while I come and look at the car, of course, at the progress on the clay, and we discussed that with the two of us, with the client as well. And on that, actually, we did a series of videos on the Brad Van Hommage, which I'll link in the description below, a series on the entire development of that car too, which might answer some of the more generic questions on the design process of a unique one-off car, which is actually very similar to a mass production car. They also work with clay, we work with clay, full scale clay, we do full scale clay, that's it. So let's move on to the next question, which is by WBizarre. He says, it's a great project, the Daytona Shooting Brake Hommage, and I would love to know more about the constraints of modifying an existing vehicle. Do the modified vehicles need any safety testing? Do you consult brands prior to starting the project? Because some brands are known to disapprove of custom vehicles wearing their badges. How do you navigate that relationship? Excellent questions. Let's start with the first. So what about the constraints of modifying a car? It depends a bit on the country where the car is going to in the end. Each country has its own specific laws and legislation, but our cars are built by those who really know what they're doing. So that means also we often have a relationship with local governments, helping with getting the car on the road, basically in specific countries, or making it road legal. There's no easy answer to that question because it depends on the client. For instance, the Daytona Shooting Brake Hommage has bespoke headlights, which is different than taking existing car parts, carryover parts, as we discussed in one of the previous videos, and installing these on a car. So that is one of many different variables in a project that could change that route a little bit. However, in general, it's about being smart. So we shouldn't do anything crazy with sharp corners or making a car unsafe in like a pedestrian safety kind of way, for instance. On top of that, we don't change the hard points of the safety structure of a car. So you can compare a car design for coach building to plastic surgery. We don't change the bones, but we do change the skin. And because of that, the structure of the car, the drivetrain, the chassis, the rollover protection, the crash structures will be kept in place. And that's why one-off cars don't need specific crashes, unless you go over a specific amount of cars being made. But then obviously, like I said, it's not a one-off car anymore. Then the rules change. You go to low series production manufacturing. But even then, for instance, if you look at manufacturers like Spyker, a Dutch car manufacturer that has now ceased to exist, they didn't crash cars either. So it depends a bit on the volume of the cars. It depends a bit on the chassis, on the structure, on what you can do per local government. So I hope that answers the question that you had as first question, WBizarre. And the second one is, how do you navigate a relationship with manufacturers? Well, it's pretty simple. We don't have relationship with manufacturers. So we don't have badges of any manufacturer on our cars because once we start working on them, they are not their cars anymore. So it's as simple as that, and for good reasons, because for instance the Brad van from '62 wasn't a Ferrari. It never had Ferrari badges. It was one could argue, a driving middle finger to Enzo Ferrari. It was everything that he hated. The customer took when the great walkout happened at Ferrari. Perhaps you know the story. Mr. Enzo Ferrari wasn't a very easy guy to work with. At a certain point in time, there was what was later called the great walkout. So a lot of people left the Ferrari factory, designers, engineers, and then Count Volpi actually wanting to do something very special with a Ferrari on forehand. Mr. Ferrari didn't enjoy that idea, so he declined. He said to the people that left Ferrari, well, hey guys, if you need a job, I'm looking at building a Ferrari that could compete the GTOs at the time in the 60s and make an even faster, even better car based on a Ferrari chassis. And that car, like I said, never had any badges because it wasn't meant as a Ferrari. It was a different car using some Ferrari technology, but it was a complete rebody, just like our car. So for historic significance, our Brad van Hommage doesn't have any badges because the 62 car didn't have that either. Well, I hope you enjoyed this new selection of questions. Thanks for sending them in. There's a lot more in my list, so keep watching this space and I'll come back very soon with more questions that you asked. Let me know in the comments if you have anything that we haven't touched on yet, because I'll be putting that in new videos. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe because it really helps reaching more people through YouTube. Thanks a lot and we speak very soon. Cheers.